Hi everyone. Today I want to talk about the CakePHP conventions. Following the CakePHP conventions is very important. It will make your life easier when you're programming in CakePHP. So let's navigate over to cakephp.org and click on CakePHP Cookbook, and then let's search for conventions. Their cookbook is very well documented and it makes things easier to find. So let's go click on the first result. Okay, so as it says here, we are a big fan of conventions over configuration. That is great. By following conventions, you will get free functionality and you will liberate yourself from maintenance nightmares of tracking config files. And it's true, it makes your life way, way easier. And there are about 4 types of conventions. The first one is the controller convention. The second one is the file and class name conventions. Then you have the database conventions and the model and view conventions. Okay, so let's start with the first one, controller conventions. Okay, each of your tables in your database will map to a controller on CakePHP. So for example, if you have the users table, there will be a users controller that will correspond to it. If you have like a junction table for like, let's say, article and categories, your controller will be named article categories controller. The conventions is that one of the things is that the names always have to be plural, they have to be Pascal cased, and they have to end with the word controller. For example, here, users controller, article categories controller. Public methods are often exposed as actions, basically. So those actions are actually mapped as URLs on your website. So for example, they give here basically user/view will map to the view method on your controller. Another example is the login method on your controller will map to the users/login URL. Some URL considerations for controller names. When you route multiple word controllers in any way you like, the convention is that your URLs are always lowercase and they are dashed. So for example, article categories will be article-categories. Next, we have the file and class name conventions. As it says here, file names usually match the class names and they follow the PSR-4 standard for autoloading. For example, the controller class latest articles controller would be found in the file name latest article controller.php. Pretty straightforward. And there are some additional naming conventions here. Again, each file would be located in the appropriate folder namespace in your app folder. Next, we have the database conventions. When it comes to databases, the table names that correspond to CakePHP models are always plural, and if there's multiple words in the table name, they are to be underscored. Again, another example, article_categories. Also, the column names with 2 or more words are also underscored. Next, we have the model conventions. Again, since table names are plural, the model conventions also follow that, and they are Pascal cased and end in the word table. Again, users table, article categories table. So as you can see, this is like different facets of the same data, basically the controller, the model, and the table. Entity class names are singular and they're Pascal cased with no suffix. Now the view conventions, the views are actually what your user sees on your website, and basically they end with the .ctp extension and are named after the controller actions they will display. For example, user login will have a login.ctp file corresponding to it. As you can see, this is just a quick summary of the conventions that I wanted to go over with. I recommend that you read this in detail so that you get familiar with the conventions, and therefore you'll have less headache when you decide to program in PHP. Here we have a schema for our database called PollingDB. The first table is a users table. It has a primary key, username, email address, password, first name, last name, creation date, when it was created, city, country, is deleted, and a role ID, which is a foreign key that is a reference to the roles table. The role would have options of either being like an admin or maybe a free user or a paid user. It would basically be used to distinguish the type of user that the user record would be. All of these are mandatory. They are not nullable. City and country are the only columns that accept nulls. The next table is the questions table. Again, we have a primary key. The content would include it would actually be the actual string question, uh, when it was created, modification date, when it was modified, if it was modified. Is open would basically denote if the question is open to being polled, if basically users can answer it. Is deleted if it's marked for deletion. Expiry date, it would give the option of the person asking the polling question to have like an expiration date. Let's say, for example, if it's only if the question's open for 2 weeks, a month, or whatever time frame the user decides to give it. And here is a foreign key of user ID that references the user table. The users table, basically, this relationship right here basically notes that a user can have many questions. Um, Basically, a user can own many questions, can create many questions. And then we have the the answers table right here, which again has a primary key. Content would be the actual string answer. Weight, if the user decides to give it a weight, a numerical weight. And the question ID, which is a foreign key that references the questions table. So a question may reference many answers. So a question might have many answers. They're all going to be multiple choice. There are no open-ended answers. And then we have the question histories table right here. Basically would keep track of all the answers that have been answered for each of the questions. We have the primary key, event date when it was answered, the user ID, which is null, the reason being that if there's a question, a polling question, where we have non-users answer, so anonymous users, then we don't have a user ID, so we'll just keep it as null. The question ID, basically the ID of the question being answered, and the answer ID, which is the answer ID of the answer being chosen. So that's it.